Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown.
President Trump's first appearance this morning at the National Prayer Breakfast had some prayerful moments, to be sure, but a little bit of controversy thrown in as well. But while the D.C. press corps was buzzing about a shot that he took at his apprentice successor, Arnold Schwarzenegger's ratings in the new spot, it was actually a comment that may produce more lasting impact, that maybe got a little bit less attention and maybe should have, as the president took aim at a law that prevents churches and other tax-exempt organizations from partaking in political campaigning and language. Watch this.
It was the great Thomas Jefferson who said, "The God who gave us life gave us liberty." Jefferson asked, can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Among those freedoms is the right to worship according to our own beliefs. That is why I will get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment and allow our representatives of faith to speak freely and without fear of retribution.
Joining me now, Governor Mike Huckabee, former Arkansas governor and Fox News contributor. Governor, great to see you tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So translate that for us. Explain the Johnson Amendment and what, why he would have made such a point to bring this up and what it means.
Well, back in 1954, Lyndon Johnson got this passed when he was a senator. It essentially was targeted to some people who had used some political campaigns against him. It was never even thought of to be used against churches and nonprofit and 501c3 organizations. But that's exactly what happened. So since the 1950s, churches have had really a chill put on them, fearing that the IRS was going to come in and shut them down if they did anything that was deemed political. So what you've seen is a lot of churches of all types and stripes, from left to right, have decided they wouldn't say anything that might be controversial or speak to issues of the day. Well, frankly, that's a complete chilling of the First Amendment rights of these pastors and priests and rabbis. So the Johnson Amendment, in its repeal, would really say, look, we have freedom of religion again. And I think it's a remarkable thing that Donald Trump has identified it, that he recognizes the impact of it, and that he's going to get rid of it. And it's something that may seem esoteric to a lot of people, but it's not.
So the fear is on some, areas and some groups of people, like the LGBTQ community, who says, so what happens next when you have a religious hospital or you have organizations that might chill on hiring people who, have certain elements of their life that they might object to?
Well, that has nothing to do with the Johnson Amendment. This is about whether or not nonprofit organizations can speak freely and pastors can speak freely from their pulpits. Donald Trump has made it very clear. He's the first presidential candidate that ever even addressed the issue of lesbian, gay, and transgender rights at a national convention, which he did. I don't think he's rolling back anything for anyone. He believes in liberty for everybody, but he doesn't believe that there should be special liberties for some and then a squashing of liberties for others. That if you're going to be in the United States of America, everybody ought to have the same freedoms, the same capabilities.
The fact is there are plenty of very partisan groups who receive the tax-exempt status who are supposed to be impartial and bipartisan, right? Last thought.
That's been a real problem, the fact that some groups have just ignored it. The truth is, in all these years, the IRS has never revoked a church's tax-exempt status, not one time. There's been one instance in which they threatened, but they never followed through. So it's really a paper tiger. But the fact that it exists still causes pastors and churches to chill. We need to thaw them out and let them speak freely.
Clearly, the president wants to thank and be loyal to the evangelical voters who supported him. This is important to them. Governor, thank you very much. Good to have you.
Let me tell you where we are in our nation right now. It's very simple. If I would have said 10 years ago marriage is between a man and a woman, you say, well, of course it is. Say that today, Pastor, you're being too political. If I would have said 30 years ago that the practice of homosexuality is not acceptable before God, that is a sin, people said, well, of course it is. Say that today. Oh, Pastor, you're being too political. If I would have said 40 years ago that abortion is wrong, that tearing up a baby in the womb is a bad thing, people would have said, well, of course it is. Say that today, and people will say, oh, Pastor, you're being too political. What we used to call biblical and moral issues is now political. And so pastors aren't supposed to speak out on that anymore. What has happened is we have allowed a moral equivalency to develop between right and left. It's not right versus left. It's right versus wrong. Let me ask you this. Where's the moral compass in America? It should be the pulpit. It should be the pastors. In other words, the pulpit has been largely quiet on this. The reason we have the problem we have in Washington, D.C. is not merely because of the wayward nature of our Congress. It's because the pulpits of America are not instructing them how they should think with the Word of God. Nor are the pulpits in America adequately instructing people on how the Bible applies to national life to the voting electorate that goes out and selects the 539. Let me ask you a question. How did we get in the mess we're in? I want to talk to you about one day that changed America, July the 2nd, 1954. And what we're dealing with these days, whether it be the issue of abortion or redefinition of marriage or drowning in debt, all these things stem from what happened July the 2nd, 1954. Lyndon Baines Johnson, he was then a senator, was returning from Texas. He'd been in a tough election. He was angry at two prominent businessmen in Texas. They opposed him through secular, not-for-profit corporations. So when Lyndon Baines Johnson got back to Washington, D.C., the IRS was in the process of overhauling the tax code. A bill was going through the Senate, and he stepped up and submitted what is now called the Johnson Amendment. The result was a speech restriction on any 501c3. The chief legislative aide of Lyndon Baines Johnson said, "We did not have churches in mind, had no idea it would impact them like this." From that point on, it became effectively illegal for a pastor to speak out in certain ways on the issue of elections. And pulpits went largely silent on biblical application to national issues. For 58 years, there's been attempts to challenge the Johnson Amendment, but it hasn't happened. So consequently, the Alliance Defense Fund, now called the Alliance Defending Freedom, all 2,200 allied attorneys are standing behind us as pastors if we will intentionally defy that Johnson Amendment and speak out politically on issues from the pulpit. No governmental intrusion in the pulpit based on the First Amendment. We will not see the spiritual awakening we all long for until the pulpit is unfettered and unmuzzled.
And it has nothing to do with money being expended on political campaigns. This is about speech. It's about allowing pastors, other religious leaders and organizations to speak freely, yes, on candidates, but more importantly about issues. We had 99 churches in 2015. The IRS opened investigations on them for various reasons. Look, where would this nation be if we did not have ministers like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who spoke out on political issues that were spiritual at their core?
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here.
Okay, but any religious leader can say whatever he or she wants to say, including politically, but you're asking an American taxpayer to continue to provide you with a tax-exempt status as you do so. I mean, right now, I as a taxpayer am supportive of all of the efforts of all of the churches in this country. But if they get political, I don't think it's fair for me as a taxpayer to continue to provide them that benefit.
It depends. Look, we have issues that are inherently moral and spiritual. Life, human sexuality, marriage, those are spiritual issues. They've been made political, and so what we have, like we saw in Houston a few years ago, where those issues were declared strictly political and pastors had their sermons subpoenaed by government officials. Look, these issues predate government. The church predates government, and long-standing tradition in this country has been, until the 1950s when the Johnson Amendment was added, was that pastors and churches can speak freely. I mean, this goes back to the Apostle Paul, or Apostle Peter and John, who said, look, you're not going to regulate what we say. We're accountable to God, not to some government bureaucrat.
Okay, final point. I don't know that it says this in the good book, but I remember hearing, be careful what you wish for. Has it occurred to Tony Perkins that in a case like this, you could be outflanked by liberal churches and liberal nonprofits who then get politically energized?
Michael, I have defended liberal churches' right to speak when George W. Bush's administration opened an investigation on them. I believe in the freedom of the pulpit to speak what it declares biblical, no matter if it's left or right.
Okay, and I agree with you, and I believe in the ability of anybody to speak their piece. But whether I, as a taxpayer, should be subsidizing it is a different question. Tony, thank you as always. I appreciate your being here.
All right, Michael.
To me, the biggest thing is for pastors to feel that they have the freedom to speak out as they see fit.
Pastor David Baker with the First Baptist Church in Belton believes the amendment should be repealed, not only to promote freedom of speech, but also citing the fact the law has never really been enforced.
Because of its vague language and the difficulty of enforcing it, and the fact that it may, ultimately, if it does go to court, prove to be unconstitutional. Right now, the pastors who want to speak out are doing it, and churches that want to speak out are doing it, and it's not consistently enforced.
House GOP members are wasting no time trying to help fulfill one of President Trump's biggest campaign promises to evangelicals, repealing the Johnson Amendment. One bill calls for its full repeal, but another just amends it to restore free speech to charities and houses of worship. Opponents of the Johnson Amendment argue it allows the IRS to bully and intimidate churches. Pastors who've been targeted by the law came to D.C. to share their stories. Houston pastor Hernan Castano says the city's lesbian mayor had his sermons and text messages subpoenaed because of his outspoken stance on issues like gay marriage. Castano was given a short period of time to turn them in, or he would face imprisonment.
It caused a lot of stress on the church members, a lot of questioning, and other pastors just fled in fear because obviously they couldn't believe this was happening in America.
Pastor Castano says the law causes a lot of confusion for clergy, and many do not understand why sharing their interpretation of scriptures could lead to fines or removal of tax-exempt status.
Talking to many pastors, I've seen the intimidation, the fear, and how they would not speak out because they don't want to lose their 501c3 status.
He says each year around election time, warnings and threats are sent to the church, citing the Johnson Amendment.
Everyone should have their full freedom of speech, not partial freedom of speech, which is what we're really happening right now in the pulpits of America.
Congressman Heiss and Senator Langford agree, which is why they introduced legislation in both sides of the House to protect these pastors.
The Free Speech Fairness Act, just as it says, protects those free rights and enables pastors and so forth to deal with political issues without fear of intimidation or retaliation from our government.
Supporters of the Johnson Amendment argue a repeal would allow churches to turn into super PACs. But this bill prohibits nonprofits from contributing to political activities or candidates.
I'm trying to work within the Senate with Republicans and Democrats alike to say, how can you be opposed to free speech? Now, I understand that there are some individuals that don't like it when churches speak out, but quite frankly, there are churches on the left and on the right politically that they should have the right. We as Americans shouldn't limit speech.
Lawmakers have high hopes 2017 will be the year it goes.
I think he wants to broaden it because there are a lot of conservative preachers and conservative people who voted for him, and I think it's probably in his best interest to get that situation reduced.
Pastor Lynch says that when he's in the pulpit, he keeps his political views to himself.
Because there are people in my congregation who are Republican and Democrat and independent, and so therefore we deal with political education. We educate our people on how to vote, when to vote, but we never tell them from the pulpit who to vote for.
Like many churches, we look to unite people and not divide them. And I think dividing people according to what political candidate you're going to support is not a good thing for us or for a lot of people.
Instead, for Snyder, there's another issue at work here.
We have a separation of church and state in this country that we adhere to. And we think it's important just to be who we are and not get involved in partisan politics. It's just a mistake.
I checked with other organizations for their policies. The Archdiocese of Cincinnati relies on the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' guidelines prohibiting endorsements. Likewise, Crossroads Community Church doesn't endorse or oppose political candidates.
Right now, this is just a proposal. Changing the Johnson Amendment would require an act of Congress.
However, others, like Pastor Aaron Wathen of St. Andrew's Christian Church, feels the law sets a precedent.
If we start rolling some of those boundaries back, then there are a lot of other things that could follow.
She worries repealing the Johnson Act could create conflict between church and government, opening a door for churches and politicians to have too much power.
If the church was able to support candidates beyond what they do now, that money could be funneled through the offering plate, which would allow someone not only to make a gift that's far above the legal limit, but could also make it tax deductible.